The chairman has arrived. The announcement
Ryan
rolled
Shen
through
is
the
hereby
memorial hall
removed
with
from the Shen
practiced
family.
dignity. Yet every conversation stopped at once. Rows of black chairs faced a giant portrait of my grandfather. White chrysanthemums surrounded the photograph, their scent mixing with sandalwood incense until the air itself felt heavy enough to breathe. No one looked at the portrait for long. They were all watching me. I stood alone in the last row, dressed in the plain black suit Grandpa had bought me years ago. It still fit. Strange, considering almost everything else in my life no longer did. At the center of the hall, my cousin Victor Shun adjusted his black tie before stepping onto the stage. Yesterday, he had merely been the acting chairman of Shun Capital. Today, according to everyone present, he was the unquestioned head of the family. He lowered his head toward Grandpa's portrait for exactly 3 seconds. Not 4, not 2, 3, just long enough for the cameras. When he turned around, his expression carried the perfect balance of grief and authority. "I thank everyone," he began calmly, "for coming to honor Chairman Edward Shun, whose vision built this family's future." Applause. At a memorial. Even now they knew when they were expected to clap. I looked across the room. Directors, senior executives, family elders, journalists invited under the excuse of documenting Grandpa's charitable legacy. Most of them had avoided answering my calls during the past week. Now I understood why. Victor raised one hand, as my grandfather wished. My heartbeat slowed, not faster, slower, because I suddenly realized he was about to speak for a man who could no longer contradict him. Today we also settle one final family matter. Dozens of heads turned toward me. I felt it before anyone spoke, like standing alone beneath cold rain. Victor smiled. "Ryan Shun." His voice echoed across the silent hall. "Please come forward." I walked without hurrying. Grandpa had once told me something during a board meeting. Never rush toward people who already think they've won. Those words returned now with painful clarity. I stopped several feet below the stage. Victor looked down at me as though I were an employee waiting for permission to speak. Instead, he unfolded a document, following an internal review approved by senior family members. He paused dramatically. "We have concluded that Ryan Shun has repeatedly acted against the interests of the Shun family." Murmurs spread instantly. Someone whispered loud enough for others to hear. I knew it, so that's why he disappeared from headquarters. Chairman Shun was right not to trust him. Another voice. "I heard he wanted control before the old chairman even passed away." The lie traveled through the room faster than truth ever could. Victor continued. "Therefore," he lifted the paper. "Ryan Shun is officially removed from all family authority, stripped of succession rights, and permanently disowned from the Shun household." Silence. Not shocked silence. Satisfied silence. The kind that follows an execution everyone expected. For a long moment, nobody looked at Grandpa's portrait anymore. They watched mine, waiting for anger, begging, desperation, anything entertaining. Instead, I simply looked at Victor. He searched my face. His confidence flickered for the first time. Why wasn't I arguing? Why wasn't I shouting? Because something felt wrong. Not emotionally. Legally. Grandpa had spent decades building Shun Capital. Every signature mattered to him. Every procedure. Every witness. Every seal. He once delayed a billion-dollar acquisition because one page had been dated incorrectly. Yet today, Victor claimed Grandpa had approved my removal, without presenting a single notarized succession record, without opening the family vault, without inviting the legal custodian. Impossible, unless everyone here believed appearances mattered more than process. Maybe they did. Victor smiled again. "Do you have anything to say?" Hundreds of eyes settled on me. I remembered another conversation with Grandpa, not in a boardroom, in the garden behind his house. He had been feeding koi fish while I complained about politics inside the company. "People who lie loudly," he'd said, "depend on honest people speaking too soon." I took a slow breath. "No." One word. Nothing more. Confusion rippled through the audience. Victor blinked. "No. I heard your announcement. That's all." "Yes." His smile tightened. "You accept your removal?" "I heard your announcement." I repeated the sentence exactly. No anger. No denial. No accusation. Only observation. For the first time all morning, Victor looked uncomfortable. He had prepared for resistance, not silence. One of the family elders stood. Ryan. It was Uncle Marcus, Grandpa's younger brother. He slammed his cane against the marble floor. You should thank Chairman Victor for allowing you to attend the memorial at all. A few relatives nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Know your place. You embarrassed the family for years. Interesting. Until last month, those same relatives had asked me for investment advice. Now, they acted as though I had never contributed anything. Power changed memories remarkably fast. Victor spread his hands like a generous king. Since Ryan has accepted the family's decision, I hope everyone will respect today's ceremony. The audience relaxed. Some even smiled. They believed the unpleasant business had ended. It hadn't, not even begun. Near the back entrance, an elderly man quietly entered the hall. Gray suit, silver hair, leather briefcase. Only 3 people noticed him immediately. I was one. Victor was another. The third was family elder Helen. Unlike everyone else, her expression changed instantly. Not because she feared him, because she recognized him. Mr. Jonathan Hale, the independent legal custodian of the Shun Family Trust. He never attended memorial services. He attended legal executions. Victor recovered first. Mr. Hale. He forced a polite smile. What an unexpected honor. The lawyer answered calmly. I apologize for interrupting. His voice wasn't loud. Yet somehow the room fell silent again. I was informed a succession announcement had already been made. Victor nodded confidently. Yes. Mr. Hale looked around the hall. Without me. Nobody answered. I see. He placed a briefcase on a nearby table. The trust agreement requires the custodian's presence before any succession declaration becomes legally effective. Victor's jaw tightened almost invisibly. There must have been a misunderstanding. There was. The lawyer looked directly at him. But not on my side. The whispers began again. What does he mean? I thought everything had already been settled. Why is the custodian here now? Victor laughed lightly. I'm sure this is only a procedural issue. Mr. Hale didn't smile. There's another procedure. He reached inside the briefcase. And Chairman Edward Shun insisted it occur immediately after the memorial service. He removed a small black key. Old-fashioned, solid steel. Everyone in the Shun family recognized it. The vault key. The original archive beneath Shun Manor. Every authenticated will. Every ownership certificate. Every trust amendment. Every controlling share agreement. Everything that mattered. Grandpa had often joked that people lied. Paper remembered. Victor's fingers curled slightly. I noticed. So did Mr. Hale. The vault, the lawyer said evenly, has not yet been opened. The room seemed to shrink. Directors exchanged uncertain looks. Family elders stopped whispering. Even reporters lowered their cameras. Because everyone suddenly realized something uncomfortable. Everything announced today might have been premature. Victor stepped down from the stage. There is no need to inconvenience everyone. There is. Mr. Hale's answer came immediately. It was Chairman Edward Shun's final written instruction. You've already seen the documents. I have. Then surely, I have seen all of them. Silence. The emphasis wasn't accidental. Victor's confidence weakened another fraction. For the first time since entering the hall, I felt something unfamiliar. Not hope. Certainty. Because Grandpa trusted procedures more than promises. If he had left instructions, he had left them for a reason. 15 minutes later, the entire senior family gathered beneath Shun Manor. The underground archive was colder than I remembered. Concrete walls. Climate-controlled storage. Rows of reinforced steel cabinets. No luxury. No decoration. Grandpa believed truth required protection, not beauty. At the center stood the original vault door. Its polished surface reflected everyone waiting behind us. Victor stood with folded arms. Family elders surrounded him. Directors whispered among themselves. Reporters had been denied entry. This moment belonged only to blood and law. Mr. Hale inserted the black key. Then another woman stepped forward. Please verify. She was the government's registered archival officer. Independent. Required by trust law. She checked the seal. The vault has not been opened since Chairman Edward Shun deposited his final documents. Victor looked away, only briefly, but I noticed. The heavy locking mechanism turned with a deep metallic sound. One lock, then another. Finally, the enormous door opened inward. Cold air drifted from inside. Shelves filled with sealed cases stretched into darkness. Mr. Hale walked directly toward a single silver container bearing Grandpa's handwritten initials. No hesitation. He already knew where it was. He placed the case on the central table. Every eye followed his hands. He broke the wax seal, removed several documents, then stopped. He looked toward me. Not Victor. Me. Before I continue, his calm voice echoed softly inside the vault. There is one instruction from Chairman Edward Shun that must be followed exactly as written. Nobody breathed. Mr. Hale unfolded the first page. His eyes moved slowly across Grandpa's handwriting. Then he looked up. Chairman Edward Shun ordered that before any successor is recognized. He paused. The identity of his only legal heir shall first be confirmed before every witness present. Victor's face lost its color, and for the first time that day, someone else looked afraid. No one moved. The underground archive seemed to hold its breath with us. The humming of the climate control system was suddenly the loudest sound in the room. Mr. Hale laid the first page flat on the polished oak table. The late chairman left explicit instructions, he said. No discussion, objection, or family vote may interrupt the reading of these documents. Uncle Marcus scoffed. This is unnecessary. Victor has already assumed the position. The family elders agreed. Mr. Hale didn't even look at him. The law is not amended by agreement. The sentence landed harder than anyone expected. Victor forced a smile. Of course, we all respect my grandfather's wishes. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. I watched him carefully. Victor had spent years mastering boardrooms. He knew when to appear confident and when to pretend humility. But I also knew his tells. Whenever he was uncertain, his thumb rubbed the edge of his wedding ring. He was doing it now. Mr. Hale unfolded another document. The first item concerned succession. He adjusted his glasses before reading aloud. To every member of the Shun family, if these words are being read, then my time has come to an end. If there is confusion regarding my successor, let the confusion end here, not through opinion, but through evidence. The room fell silent again. Grandfather's words sounded exactly as I remembered him. Direct, calm, impossible to misunderstand. Mr. Hale continued, leadership of the Shun family shall never be inherited through popularity, convenience, or manipulation. It shall pass only according to the trust charter signed before independent witnesses. Victor's smile disappeared. One of the directors cleared his throat. I wasn't aware there was a separate charter. There was, Mr. Hale replied. It has existed for 27 years. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. 27 years. Older than some of the people standing inside the vault. Grandfather had prepared for this long before anyone imagined today's conflict. Family elder Helen stepped closer. Mr. Hale, surely the chairman also considered the family's recommendation? He did, and he rejected it. The answer was immediate. No hesitation, no room for interpretation. Marcus slammed his cane against the floor. Impossible. Mr. Hale calmly produced another sealed envelope. This letter explains why. He opened it. Families are most dangerous when they confuse loyalty with obedience. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Grandfather never wasted words. He had once told me that a single truthful sentence carried more weight than 100 speeches. Mr. Hale continued reading. Anyone demanding unquestioning agreement has already forgotten the purpose of leadership. Several family members quietly lowered their eyes. Victor interrupted. With respect, my grandfather also valued unity. He did. Mr. Hale met his gaze. But he never sacrificed truth to create it. The archival officer slid another folder toward Mr. Hale. Identity verification. He nodded. This document is registered. A thin layer of tension spread across the room. Even those who had loudly supported Victor now looked uncertain. If the identity of the legal heir required official verification, then perhaps today's public announcement had indeed been premature. Mr. Hale opened the folder carefully. Inside were certified records bearing government seals, birth registration, family trust amendments, DNA verification conducted years earlier. Everything had been authenticated. He looked around the room. Chairman Edward Shin anticipated that questions might arise regarding his successor. Victor laughed softly. Questions? There are none. Mr. Hale ignored him. Therefore, he ordered independent verification while he was still alive. The laughter stopped. Marcus frowned. What verification? The kind that cannot be influenced after death. I felt dozens of eyes settle on me again. Some carried pity, others suspicion. A few seemed almost hopeful. I kept my hands folded behind my back. Grandfather had taught me another lesson. When truth is strong enough, don't compete with lies. Let truth arrive at its own pace. So I waited. Mr. Hale lifted the final verification report. The laboratory confirmed. He paused only long enough to ensure every person was listening. That Ryan Shun is the biological grandson of Chairman Edward Shun. No one reacted immediately. The sentence seemed almost too ordinary. Then understanding spread. Victor wasn't simply losing an argument. He was losing the foundation beneath every claim he had made. Marcus stepped forward. No one questioned Ryan's bloodline. Mr. Hale looked directly at him. You should continue listening. Another document appeared. Thicker, older. Its edges had yellowed with time. This, Mr. Hale said, is the original trust charter. He carefully opened it. The succession clause has never been amended. Victor swallowed. I noticed. So did everyone else. Mr. Hale read slowly. Upon my death, all controlling authority over Shun Capital, the family trust, and associated voting rights shall transfer to my only legal successor. He turned the page. The document then identifies that successor by name. The room became perfectly still. I could hear someone breathing heavily behind me. Another relative whispered a prayer. Marcus gripped his cane so tightly his knuckles turned white. Victor stared at the page as though willing the ink to change. It didn't. Mr. Hale raised his eyes. The successor named in Chairman Edward Shun's registered trust charter is... His gaze found mine. Ryan Shun. No one spoke. Not because they accepted it. Because they couldn't. Victor took a slow step forward. That's impossible. It is registered. There must be another amendment. There isn't. My grandfather promised. The chairman made many promises. Mr. Hale's voice remained calm. But only signed documents carry legal authority. Victor's face drained of color. One director finally broke the silence. If Ryan is the legal successor... He looked toward Victor. Then today's announcement, Mr. Hale answered before anyone else could, has no legal effect. Another director whispered, the board has been operating under false assumptions. A third executive rubbed his forehead. We may have violated corporate governance procedures. The realization spread through the room like a crack through glass. People weren't thinking about family anymore. They were thinking about consequences. Legal consequences. Financial consequences. Personal consequences. Victor suddenly laughed. It sounded forced. So, this is about paperwork. Mr. Hale closed the charter. No, it is about law. Victor turned toward the elders. You all agreed. No one answered. You supported me. Still silence. The same relatives who had applauded him upstairs now avoided meeting his eyes. Support was easy. Responsibility wasn't. For the first time that entire day, Victor looked directly at me. You planned this. I finally spoke. No, you knew. I trusted my grandfather. Why didn't you stop the ceremony? I held his gaze. Because I wanted everyone to hear your decision before they heard his. His expression froze. Only then did he understand. My silence had never been surrender. It had been patience. Had I interrupted him upstairs, people would have remembered an argument. Now, they would remember a lie. And there's a difference. Mr. Hale placed one final sealed envelope onto the table. There is still one document remaining. Victor looked up sharply. What document? The chairman instructed that it be opened only after the identity of the legal successor had been confirmed. Marcus frowned. What else could possibly be left? Mr. Hale rested his hand on the envelope. His expression grew unusually serious. I believe. He looked from Victor to me. This document explains why Chairman Edward Shun expected today's events to happen. A cold silence settled over the vault. If grandfather had anticipated today's betrayal, then he had known far more than any of us realized. And whatever was inside that final envelope was about to change far more than the question of inheritance. No one reached for the envelope. No one spoke. The silence inside the vault had become heavier than the steel door behind us. The relatives who had spent the morning treating Victor as the new patriarch now stood uncertain, their confidence dissolving into uneasy glances. Mr. Hale rested both hands on the table. This envelope, he said, was sealed by Chairman Edward Shun 6 months ago. It carries his personal seal and was witnessed by 2 independent notaries. He turned it so everyone could see the crimson wax. The instructions are simple. He looked around the room. Open only after Ryan Shun has been confirmed as my legal successor. Victor's jaw tightened. What difference could another letter possibly make? Mr. Hale answered quietly. Chairman Shun believed it would answer the question everyone should be asking. And what question is that? Uncle Marcus demanded. Mr. Hale met his eyes. Why was there an attempt to replace the legal successor before the vault was opened? The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. No one had dared ask it. Until now. The wax seal broke with a crisp snap. Inside were 3 items. A handwritten letter. A slim black flash drive. A folded document marked confidential. Mr. Hale picked up the handwritten letter first. I will read exactly as it was written. He unfolded the pages. Even before he began, I recognized my grandfather's neat, disciplined handwriting. If this letter is being read, then someone ignored my instructions. A murmur swept through the room. If Ryan stands before you as my confirmed successor, while another person has already claimed leadership, then understand one thing. Mr. Hale paused. That claim was never made in ignorance. Victor's breathing became visibly heavier. Grandfather had not written emotionally. He had written like the chairman he had always been. Every sentence carried weight. Mistakes deserve forgiveness. Deliberate deception deserves exposure. No one interrupted. No one could. Mr. Hale placed the letter down and lifted the confidential document. This is a report commissioned directly by Chairman Shun. He opened the first page. The report concerns unauthorized access to internal succession records. Victor took a step forward. I object. You may object after the reading, Mr. Hale replied. The chairman specifically anticipated objections. A few directors exchanged nervous looks. Unauthorized access? The phrase alone suggested far more than family disagreement. Mr. Hale continued. 6 months before his passing, Chairman Shun discovered that someone had attempted to obtain restricted trust documents without authorization. He turned another page. The attempt failed. Another. The security system recorded every access request. Another. The report includes names. The room seemed to shrink. Victor spoke again, louder this time. This is ridiculous. No. It was the first word family elder Helen had spoken in several minutes. If Edward ordered an investigation, she looked toward Victor. Then we should hear it. Victor stared at her in disbelief. You supported me. I supported stability. She lowered her eyes. Those are not always the same thing. Mr. Hale reached the final page. The investigator concluded that the unauthorized requests originated from credentials belonging to... He stopped. Not for drama. To verify the signature at the bottom. He looked up. Vice Chairman Victor Shun. The words echoed through the vault. No. Victor's denial came instantly. Those credentials were stolen. Mr. Hale nodded once. The report considered that possibility. He lifted another sheet. The login occurred using your personal biometric verification. Victor said nothing. It also occurred from your private office. Silence. And your security code. One director slowly stepped away from Victor. Then another. No one wanted to stand too close to a man suddenly accused of manipulating succession records. I never altered the documents, Victor insisted. I only wanted to confirm what grandfather intended. Mr. Hale asked calmly. Then why did you authorize the destruction of the access logs the following morning? Victor froze. You weren't aware they had been backed up. The lawyer's voice remained perfectly level. The chairman requested independent copies before informing anyone. I finally understood. Grandfather hadn't merely expected resistance. He had expected someone to act before his death. And instead of confronting them immediately, he had watched, collected evidence, waited, not out of cruelty, out of certainty. Marcus looked from Victor to the report. Tell me this isn't true. Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His silence answered the question better than words could. For years, Victor had built his reputation on confidence. Now, standing beneath the estate he hoped to control, confidence deserted him. One of the independent directors broke the silence. Mr. Hale. Yes. If these findings are authentic, they are. Then the emergency board resolution appointing Victor as chairman was obtained under false representations. It appears so. Another director spoke immediately. We must suspend implementation. A third nodded. And notify the full board before markets open. Business instinct had finally overtaken family politics. The room was no longer divided between relatives. It was divided between those protecting the company and those protecting themselves. Victor turned toward me. His voice had lost its certainty. What do you want? The question surprised everyone, perhaps even him. I answered honestly, the truth. And after that, I looked at the portrait-sized family crest engraved on the vault wall. My grandfather built this company to outlive all of us. I met Victor's eyes again. I'm not interested in winning a family argument. I paused. I'm interested in making sure his last wishes aren't buried with him. No threats, no insults, no triumph, just the truth. For reasons I couldn't explain, that seemed to unsettle Victor more than any accusation could have. Mr. Hale carefully gathered the documents. As of this moment, Ryan Shun is recognized as the sole legal successor under the Shun Family Trust. He looked toward the directors. Corporate appointments remain the responsibility of the board. Then he turned to me. But no lawful succession process can continue without your participation. I nodded once. I understand. For the first time since grandfather's death, I felt the weight of what he had entrusted to me. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't power. It was responsibility. And responsibility had a way of arriving only after everyone else had finished fighting over power. As the vault door slowly opened and everyone began filing out, I remained behind for a moment. I looked once more at the shelves where grandfather had stored decades of carefully documented truth. He had often said that people feared evidence because evidence never became emotional. It simply waited. The first call came before we reached the main hall. Victor's phone vibrated once, then again, and again. He glanced at the screen, rejected the call, and slipped the phone back into his pocket without answering. 10 seconds later, it rang again. This time, one of the independent directors looked directly at him. You should answer. Victor forced a smile. It can wait. No, the director replied. I don't think it can. The atmosphere had changed completely. Less than an hour earlier, Victor had walked through the memorial hall as the unquestioned chairman. Now, no one walked beside him. The relatives who had applauded his speech suddenly found urgent reasons to speak with someone else. Even Uncle Marcus, who had defended him so fiercely, remained several steps behind, avoiding eye contact. I noticed all of it. I said nothing. Grandfather had once told me, when a bridge collapses, don't stand underneath it trying to prove it was weak. Just step aside. So I did. When we returned to the memorial hall, the guests sensed immediately that something had changed. No announcement had been made. No explanation had been offered. Yet whispers spread from row to row. Why did the directors look so serious? Why is Mr. Hale carrying the vault documents? Didn't they already announce the successor? The reporters lifted their cameras again. Victor straightened his jacket and walked toward the stage as if nothing had happened. Mr. Hale stopped him. There will be no further announcements. Victor's smile froze. The guests deserve stability. The guests deserve the truth. We should discuss this privately. The chairman instructed otherwise. Mr. Hale handed a sealed copy of the succession confirmation to the head of corporate compliance. It is now part of the official record. There would be no hiding it. I quietly stepped toward my grandfather's portrait. The crowd expected me to celebrate, to confront Victor, to humiliate him the way he had tried to humiliate me. Instead, I bowed. Nothing more. For several long moments, I simply stood there. I kept my promise, Grandpa. I whispered so softly that only I could hear. I trusted your preparation instead of my anger. When I stepped back, I noticed family elder Helen watching me. You could have embarrassed him. I know. Why didn't you? I looked toward the portrait. Today is still my grandfather's memorial. She studied me for a moment before nodding slowly. Edward chose well. Across the room, Victor was already trying to recover. He gathered several family elders around him. The legal documents concern inheritance, he said calmly. They do not automatically determine corporate leadership. Technically, he wasn't wrong. Shin Capital's chairman was elected by the board. But everyone in that room understood one thing. Grandfather's controlling shares belonged to the legal successor. Without those shares, Victor's influence was already slipping away. One elder whispered, "We should hold an emergency family meeting." Another replied, "First we need to know what the board intends." For the first time, they were asking questions instead of giving orders. My phone buzzed. It was Daniel Wu, Shun Capital's chief financial officer. "Can we speak privately?" I looked up. Daniel stood near one of the marble columns. He had worked beside grandfather for nearly 20 years. He rarely spoke unless necessary. I walked over. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "I should have contacted you earlier. You believed Victor. I believed the process." He sighed, and then the process disappeared. We stood in silence for a moment. Finally, he said, "The board has called an emergency session this afternoon. I expected that. They'll ask you to attend. I'll attend. They'll expect you to fight." I smiled faintly. They may be disappointed. Daniel frowned. "You aren't going after Victor?" "I'm going to protect the company." "Those aren't always the same thing." "No." I looked toward the memorial hall. "But today they are different." Grandfather had built Shun Capital over 40 years. Thousands of employees depended on it. Their futures mattered more than my pride. Daniel seemed to understand. "I hope you'd say that." Before we could continue, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. A young legal assistant approached Mr. Hale, carrying a tablet. "Sir, what is it?" "The media." Mr. Hale read the screen. His expression remained calm. "The succession announcement has leaked." Victor looked up immediately. "Impossible. The reporters outside have already received copies." "From whom?" Mr. Hale looked at him evenly. "The official registry." Victor's shoulders sank. Truth traveled more slowly than rumors. But once it reached the public record, it became very difficult to outrun. Within minutes, phones across the memorial hall began vibrating. Family members opened news alerts. Executives exchanged worried looks. The headline spreading through the financial press was simple. "Legal successor confirmed after memorial dispute at Shun Capital." No accusations. No sensational language. Just facts. Facts were enough. Victor read the headline on someone else's screen. His face remained composed. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed him. I expected him to lash out. Instead, he walked toward me. Everyone noticed. The conversation stopped. "Ryan." His voice was calm again. "We need to talk." "We are talking. Alone." "I don't think that's necessary." He glanced around the room. "You've made your point." "I haven't made any." The vault did. For the first time since childhood, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he lowered his voice. "You don't understand what's coming." "Then explain." "The banks. The investors. The board. They hate uncertainty." "I know. If this turns into a public fight, the company suffers." "I agree." He seemed surprised. "Then help me avoid it." "How?" "Support me as interim chairman." I looked at him carefully. "Even after everything, you'll inherit eventually. And until then, I keep running the company." His proposal sounded reasonable. Too reasonable, which meant there was something beneath it. I'll consider whatever is best for Shun Capital, I answered. Nothing more, nothing less. He searched my face for several moments. He found nothing. That unsettled him more than rejection would have. After he walked away, Daniel quietly asked, "Are you actually considering it?" "I'm considering the company. And Victor, I've stopped trying to save people from the consequences of their own decisions." Daniel nodded slowly. Edward used to say something similar. I smiled. He taught us both. As the memorial finally drew to a close, I noticed workers beginning to remove the white flowers from around grandfather's portrait. The ceremony was ending. The real struggle was only beginning. My phone vibrated again. This time the message came from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. "If you want to know who helped Victor, don't trust everyone sitting on your side of the boardroom." No signature, no explanation, just a warning. I read it twice before locking the screen. Someone else knew more than they were willing to say. And whoever had sent that message had just transformed a family dispute into something much larger. The boardroom on the 38th floor had always felt different after my grandfather's death. The walls were the same polished walnut. The long conference table still reflected the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His chair remained at the head of the room. Empty. No one had dared sit in it. Not even Victor. As I entered, conversation stopped. Some directors nodded respectfully. Others watched me with cautious curiosity. A week ago, I had been treated as an inconvenient relative. Now, I was the legal successor to the controlling trust. The law had changed my position. It had not yet changed everyone's loyalty. Daniel Wu stood beside the projector. "The meeting will begin shortly." I nodded. "Thank you." He lowered his voice. "Several directors met with Victor before you arrived. I assumed they would. A few are still hoping for a compromise. I hope they find one." Daniel frowned. "You aren't going to fight for the chairmanship?" "I didn't come to fight." He looked genuinely puzzled. "What did you come for?" "To listen." Victor entered a moment later. His suit was immaculate. His expression was composed. Only someone who knew him well would notice the exhaustion beneath his eyes. He took a seat halfway down the table, rather than at the head. A calculated decision. He wanted to appear humble. The independent chair of the board, Margaret Lin, opened the meeting. "The purpose of today's session is not to elect a chairman." Several directors exchanged surprised looks. "It is to determine whether recent events have affected the board's confidence in existing executive leadership." A careful choice of words. No one wanted to create panic in the markets. Victor stood first. I acknowledged the legal determination regarding the family trust. He looked toward me. "I have no intention of disputing Mr. Ryan Shin's status as successor." That statement immediately softened several faces around the table. He continued, "However, succession and corporate management are separate matters." True. The company is currently negotiating 3 international acquisitions. Abrupt leadership changes could damage shareholder value. Also true. He spoke for nearly 15 minutes. Measured, professional, persuasive. When he finished, several directors nodded. Then Margaret looked toward me. "Mr. Shun, the board would like to hear your position." Every eye settled on me. I stood slowly. "I agree with Victor." The room froze. Even Victor blinked. "I also believe unnecessary instability could harm Shin Capital." A director leaned forward. "Then you support his continuation as chairman?" I didn't say that. I folded my hands. I said I support stability. There was an important difference. I inherited responsibility. I let the words settle before continuing. I did not inherit the right to ignore evidence. The projector screen lit up behind Daniel. Not with documents I had prepared, with the company's own governance policy. Section 8.4. Daniel read aloud. "Any executive under formal investigation involving fiduciary conduct shall temporarily relinquish executive authority pending independent review." Several directors immediately reached for their printed manuals. Victor's expression hardened. "There is no investigation." Margaret calmly replied. "There is now." The motion passed almost unanimously. Not because I had demanded it, because the company's own rules required it. Victor was placed on temporary administrative leave pending an independent review. No accusations. No verdict. Only procedure. Grandfather would have approved. As the meeting adjourned, Reporters flooded the lobby below. The headlines were immediate. Shun Capital launches independent governance review. No scandal, no sensationalism, just facts. Again, facts were enough. Victor caught up with me outside the elevators. You planned this. No, you knew the governance manual. So did you. His shoulders dropped. Underestimated you. You underestimated grandfather. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, "Why aren't you trying to destroy me?" I looked through the glass wall toward the city. Because if I make this about revenge, everyone loses. He searched my face for anger. There wasn't any. Only disappointment. Somehow that seemed harder for him to bear. That evening, I returned to my grandfather's private office for the first time since the memorial. Nothing had been disturbed. His fountain pen rested beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. A cup, long emptied of tea, still sat on the windowsill. His assistant, Mrs. Chun, waited quietly near the door. He told me you'd come. I smiled faintly. He always assumed I'd arrive late. He said grief makes people avoid familiar places. She opened a small cabinet and removed a plain wooden box. He left this for you. Inside lay an old leather notebook. Not financial records. Not legal documents. A journal. On the first page, in grandfather's handwriting, were only 2 sentences. Leadership begins the day you stop needing to win every argument. Watch who becomes desperate when you refuse to fight. I closed the notebook slowly. Only now did I fully understand why he had prepared me for silence instead of conflict. As I left the office, Daniel hurried down the corridor. We found something. What happened? The forensic auditors recovered deleted email metadata. From Victor, Daniel shook his head. No. Then whose? He handed me a printed report. The sender's name made me stop walking. Uncle Marcus Shun. The emails had been exchanged with an outside consulting firm weeks before grandfather's death. The subject line was brief. Succession transition strategy. I looked up at Daniel. So Victor wasn't acting alone. Daniel nodded grimly. It appears the plan was much bigger than we thought. I folded the report carefully and slipped it into the journal. Grandfather had been right. The first truth had exposed the lie. The next truth would expose the people hiding behind it. The email wasn't proof. It was a direction. That distinction mattered. I stared at the printed metadata in my grandfather's office while Daniel waited quietly across the desk. Can we recover the messages themselves? I asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Our forensic team believes so. How long? They're already working. I looked at the clock on the wall. Grandfather used to say that the first person to rush after discovering evidence was usually the first person to make a mistake. We wait. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You're certain? If the emails exist, they'll still exist in an hour. He smiled faintly. Sometimes you sound exactly like him. Meanwhile, the news surrounding Shun Capital continued to spread. Financial media reported only verified facts. The legal successor had been confirmed. The board had opened an independent governance review. The acting chairman had stepped aside pending investigation. There were no dramatic accusations. No leaks from anonymous insiders. Only official statements. Ironically, that made investors calmer. Markets feared uncertainty more than uncomfortable truths. Victor, however, refused to disappear. The following morning, he requested permission to address the board. Margaret approved, with one condition. Every statement would be recorded. Every director would receive the transcript. Nothing would happen behind closed doors. When Victor entered the conference room, he looked composed. He had regained some of the confidence he had lost in the vault. He stood at the far end of the table. I made mistakes. Several directors looked surprised. But I never acted against Shun Capital. He turned toward me. I believed I was protecting the company. I remained silent. He continued. If my judgment caused confusion, I accept responsibility. It was a careful speech. Not an apology. Not quite a denial. He was trying to separate questionable decisions from dishonest intentions. For many people, that distinction would have been enough. But evidence cared little about intentions. Halfway through his statement, the conference room doors opened. The head of forensic compliance entered carrying 2 sealed evidence folders. He apologized for interrupting. Margaret nodded. Proceed. He placed both folders on the table. The digital recovery has been completed. Every conversation stopped. Victor's eyes followed the folders. Very slowly, very carefully, the compliance officer opened the first. We successfully recovered the deleted correspondence. He connected a secure laptop to the display screen. The first email appeared. From Marcus Shun to Victor Shun. Subject: Board Preparation. No one spoke. The officer scrolled. The legal documents remain in the vault. As long as we control the announcement first, perception becomes reality. The room fell completely silent. Another email. Delay Mr. Hale until after the memorial. Another. Most directors will follow whoever appears to have authority. No speculation. No interpretation. Only their own words. Marcus stood so abruptly that his chair tipped backward. Those emails are incomplete. The compliance officer nodded. They are. He opened the second folder. The complete versions are significantly longer. Marcus's face lost all color. Daniel quietly slid printed copies toward every director. Nobody reached for them immediately. Nobody wanted to be the first person to hold evidence of betrayal. Finally, Margaret spoke. Mr. Marcus Shun. She looked directly at him. Do you deny writing these messages? Marcus looked toward Victor. Victor looked down. There would be no rescue. Not today. Marcus's voice cracked. I was trying to avoid instability. Margaret closed the folder. So you acknowledge their authenticity. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next revelation came from somewhere no one expected. Family elder Helen stood. She had remained silent through almost every meeting since the memorial. Now every eye turned toward her. I have something to say. Margaret gestured for her to continue. Helen removed a small envelope from her handbag. I received this 6 weeks before Edward passed away. She handed it to Mr. Hale. He asked me to keep it unless today's events proved him correct. Mr. Hale examined the handwriting. It is genuine. He unfolded the note. It contained only one paragraph. If anyone attempts to appoint a successor before the vault is opened, they are not acting out of grief. They are acting out of fear. Nothing more. No names. No accusations. Yet everyone understood exactly what it meant. Grandfather had anticipated the scheme. He simply refused to accuse anyone without evidence. Instead, he prepared for the evidence to reveal them. The room changed. Not dramatically. Quietly. One director who had supported Victor removed his name from a proposed leadership resolution. Another requested an external ethics review. A third asked for independent oversight of all succession-related decisions made during the previous 6 months. The collapse wasn't loud. It happened one signature at a time. One withdrawn vote. One change opinion. One undeniable document. That was how institutions protected themselves. Victor finally spoke. His voice sounded tired for the first time. I never intended for this to happen. I looked at him. What exactly didn't you intend? He couldn't answer. Because there were too many possibilities. The forged narrative, the premature announcement, the manipulation, the deception. Which part had he not intended? Or had he only failed because grandfather had prepared better than he had? Margaret addressed the board. The independent investigation has reached sufficient preliminary findings. She looked around the table. I move that Victor Shun be permanently removed from executive authority pending any future legal proceedings. The vote was conducted by written ballot. No speeches, no arguments. When the ballots were counted, the result was overwhelming. Victor remained seated. He didn't protest. He simply stared at the polished surface of the conference table. The room that had once applauded him now avoided looking in his direction. Power had left him as quietly as it had arrived. As the meeting ended, Victor approached me in the corridor. There was a time. He stopped. When we were almost brothers. We were. I thought becoming chairman would finally prove I deserved this family. I studied him carefully. You already belong to the family. He frowned. You just stopped believing that was enough. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he asked the question I had. Because hatred would mean you still control part of my life. He lowered his eyes. For the first time, I saw genuine regret. Not for being exposed. For understanding, too late, what ambition it cost him. That evening I returned to grandfather's office once more. The sunset painted the skyline in shades of gold and gray. His leather notebook still rested on the desk. I opened to the next unwritten page. Inside the back cover, tucked where I hadn't noticed before, was a small folded card. On it, in his familiar handwriting, were the final words he had left for me. Truth does not destroy families. Secrets do. I closed the notebook slowly. Outside the office window, the lights of Shun Capital began to glow across the city. The company had survived. The truth had survived. Now came the harder task, building something worthy of both. The first morning after the investigation ended felt strangely ordinary. No reporters waited outside my apartment. No emergency phone calls interrupted breakfast. For the first time since my grandfather's memorial, the silence wasn't filled with uncertainty. It was filled with responsibility. My calendar was already packed. Meetings with division heads, a review of stall projects, a session with employee representatives, an interview to appoint an interim chief compliance officer. None of them were glamorous. Grandfather used to say that companies were rarely saved by dramatic decisions. They were saved by thousands of quiet ones. When I arrived at Shun Capital headquarters, employees who had never spoken to me before greeted me with polite nods. Some smiled. Others simply looked relieved. Word had spread that there would be no sweeping purge, no public witch hunt, no revenge against people who had chosen the wrong side. I had no interest in ruling through fear. Fear built obedience. It never built trust. The executive conference room looked different without Victor. Not emptier, lighter. Margaret opened the meeting. The board has unanimously approved an interim governance plan. She slid a folder toward me. We would like you to serve as executive trustee while the chairman election process is completed. I looked around the room. You don't want a chairman today. No, Daniel answered before anyone else. We want stability. I nodded. Then let's focus on the company instead of titles. Several directors smiled. It was the first genuinely relaxed moment any of us had shared in weeks. Our first decision surprised everyone. Instead of discussing acquisitions or profits, I proposed an independent employee listening committee. One director looked confused. That's our priority? Yes. Why? I stood and walked toward the glass wall overlooking the city. During the succession dispute, thousands of employees watched rumors spread while leadership remained silent. I turned back. If trust inside the company is broken, quarterly profits won't repair it. Margaret leaned back thoughtfully. I support the proposal. The motion passed unanimously. Over the following weeks, department managers met directly with employees. Anonymous concerns were collected. Promotion policies were reviewed. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. The changes weren't dramatic enough to make headlines, but people inside the company noticed. An engineer stopped me in the lobby one afternoon. I've worked here 11 years. I recognized his employee badge. What can I do for you? He hesitated. I just wanted to say. He smiled awkwardly. This is the first time anyone asked us what wasn't working. I thanked him. As he walked away, I realized something. Respect couldn't be inherited. It had to be earned. Every single day. One evening, Mrs. Chun knocked softly on my office door. I brought something. She carried a weathered cardboard box. It was in Chairman Shun's private storage. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters. Some were addressed to business partners, others to former employees. One envelope simply read, "For the person who inherits responsibility." I opened it carefully. Grandfather's handwriting appeared once again. If you're reading this, you've already discovered that leadership is lonelier than ambition. People will thank you for victories they helped create. They will blame you for storms that began long before you arrived. Accept both with equal calm. I read the letter twice before placing it back inside the envelope. Mrs. Chun smiled gently. He wrote those during the first year after your grandmother passed away. He never mentioned them. He rarely spoke about his hardest years. The board election approached quietly. Several directors encouraged me to campaign. I declined. If people believe I deserve the position, they'll vote. And if they don't, then I have work to keep doing. Daniel laughed. That's the least political answer I've ever heard. I learned from someone who disliked politics. Meanwhile, legal proceedings against Marcus continued. He requested a private meeting. At first I refused. Then I remembered grandfather's final note. Truth does not destroy families. Secrets do. So I agreed. The meeting took place in a simple conference room. No lawyers, no reporters, just the two of us. Marcus looked older than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. I owe you an apology. I remained silent. I convinced myself Edward had already chosen Victor. He rubbed his hands together. When I learned the truth, he shook his head. I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong. You didn't just stay silent. I know. You helped create the lie. He closed his eyes briefly. I did. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, "Can you forgive me?" I thought carefully before answering. "I can forgive you." Hope appeared in his expression. But forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility. His shoulders lowered. I understand. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There should have been. Some wounds healed slowly. Others became reminders. Months later, the board gathered once more. This time the agenda contained only one item: election of the new chairman. Margaret distributed the ballots. No speeches, no campaigns, no promises. When the votes were counted, every ballot carried the same name: Ryan Shun. The room applauded quietly. I stood. "Thank you." Then I looked toward the empty chair that had once belonged to grandfather. I accept, not because I had one, because it was finally time to serve. That evening, I visited my grandfather's grave alone. Fresh flowers rested beside the stone. The wind moved gently through the surrounding trees. I placed my hand against the cool granite. The company is stable. I smiled faintly. They still argue in board meetings. That would have pleased him. He always believed respectful disagreement produced better decisions than comfortable silence. As I turned to leave, my phone vibrated. Daniel had sent a single message. Employee satisfaction is at its highest level in 12 years. I looked back once more at the gravestone. For the first time since the memorial, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Peace. Not because every problem had disappeared, because winning no longer mattered. Protecting what deserved to survive did. The first annual shareholders meeting after my grandfather's death arrived almost exactly 1 year after the memorial. The same headquarters, the same auditorium, many of the same faces. Yet the atmosphere was completely different. Last year, people had gathered expecting a struggle for power. This year, they gathered expecting answers about the future. That difference meant more to me than any title ever could. As I stood behind the stage curtain waiting to speak, Daniel adjusted his tie beside me. "You know," he said with a smile, "this is the first shareholders meeting in years where our biggest concern isn't family politics." "What is it now?" He handed me the latest report. "They're wondering how we're going to expand into Southeast Asia." I laughed quietly. "That's a much better problem." "It is." He looked toward the stage. Edward would have been proud. I didn't answer immediately. I hope he'd simply approve. The meeting began exactly on schedule. Margaret introduced the board. The annual financial report was presented. Revenue had recovered. Employee retention had reached record highs. The governance reforms had become permanent. Every independent audit had returned the same conclusion. Shin Capital had emerged stronger than before. Not because the crisis had never happened, because it had finally been confronted honestly. When my turn came to speak, I walked slowly to the podium. Hundreds of shareholders looked toward the stage. Some had supported Victor. Some had supported me. Most had simply wanted the company to survive. I understood all of them. My grandfather believed, I began, that every company eventually becomes a reflection of the values it rewards. The room remained silent. We spent too many years rewarding appearances. I paused. From today onward, we will reward accountability. The applause wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It felt genuine. After the meeting ended, reporters gathered in the lobby. Questions came quickly. "Chairman Shun, what lesson did the succession dispute teach you?" I considered the question carefully. That trust should never depend on a single person. Another reporter asked, "Do you regret not confronting the false announcement during the memorial?" I smiled faintly. "No." "Why?" "Because arguments convince very few people." I remembered standing beneath grandfather's portrait while everyone waited for me to fight. Evidence convinced everyone. The cameras flashed. The interview ended. There was nothing more to add. That afternoon, my assistant informed me that someone wished to see me. I looked at the visitor request. Victor Shun. I remained silent for several moments before answering. Show him in. Victor entered alone. He looked different, not defeated, simply lighter. He no longer wore expensive cufflinks or the perfectly tailored confidence that had once defined him. He carried only a small envelope. I won't keep you long. I gestured toward the chair across from my desk. He remained standing. I accepted a position overseas. I nodded. I heard. It starts next month. There was another silence. Finally, he placed the envelope on my desk. What's this? My resignation from every remaining family trust. You've already resigned. This one is personal. I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line caught my attention immediately. I spent so long trying to inherit a position that I forgot to build a life. I looked up. Victor smiled sadly. I thought becoming chairman would finally prove I mattered. And it turns out titles can't solve questions they didn't create. For the first time in many years, we spoke honestly. Not as rivals, not even as cousins, just as two men who had made different choices. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I know. I only wanted you to know. He hesitated. That grandfather was right about you. I closed the letter carefully. He believed you had good in you too. Victor looked genuinely surprised. I stopped believing him. That's where everything started. He nodded once. Then he extended his hand. I shook it. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us needed to. Some endings didn't require celebration, only acceptance. Several weeks later, I received another invitation. This one came from family elder Helen. She wished to gather the remaining members of the Shun family for dinner. No business, no legal matters, just family. I almost declined. Then I remembered something grandfather once said while watching koi fish circle a quiet pond. Never confuse protecting yourself with isolating yourself. So I went. The dinner was awkward at first. Conversations remained careful. People chose their words more thoughtfully than before. That wasn't entirely a bad thing. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, one honest conversation at a time. Marcus attended as well. He had accepted responsibility for his actions and retired from every family position. When dinner ended, he approached me quietly. I know I can't repair the past. No, but thank you, his voice caught, for not teaching the next generation to hate us. I looked around the room. Several younger cousins were laughing together. None of them cared about succession. None of them remembered who had stood on which side during the memorial. They were simply family. They deserve something better than what we gave each other. Marcus nodded. I hope they keep it. As the years passed, Shun Capital continued to grow. Not every decision succeeded. Not every investment worked. There were recessions, competition, difficult negotiations. Leadership never became easy. It simply became meaningful. Whenever I faced an impossible decision, I found myself opening grandfather's old leather notebook. One page remained blank until the day our company celebrated its 50th anniversary. That morning, I finally wrote beneath his last entry. An inheritance isn't measured by what someone leaves behind. It's measured by what you choose not to lose. I closed the notebook and placed it back in a wooden box where it belonged. That evening, after the anniversary celebration had ended, I visited grandfather's memorial garden. The koi still circled quietly beneath the surface of the pond. The old stone bench remained exactly where it had always been. I sat there until sunset. For a long time, I thought about the day everything had changed. The public humiliation, the false announcement, the vault, the evidence, the silence. If I had shouted that morning, perhaps I would have won an argument. By remaining patient, the truth had won something far greater. It had restored the company my grandfather loved. It had given our family a chance, however imperfect, to begin again. The evening breeze stirred the trees above me. I smiled, not because I had inherited Shin Capital, but because, in the end, I had inherited the one thing grandfather valued more than wealth: the responsibility to protect the truth.